One time, I'm not very proud of this because I'm not sure whether Ben and I did it with, what do we say, prejudice in our hearts at the time or what, but Ben and I were back on the sand hill just across the Paddy Drain, between the house and the fifth concession. And it was as level as could be, and it was sandy, and you could fall in it, drop in it, or anything else, and you didn't get bruised like you did if you fell on the clay, and it was yellow sand. And we used to race horses there. We'd we had a horse by the name of Kentucky Belle and one by the name of Dominion. Dominion was born the same time that I was, and I was only 6 months old when they first put me on his back, and he's just a colt, and they walked him all around the box stall with me in his back, and I guess he had somebody's on his back after that the rest of his life. So anyway, Ben and I was back racing the horses up and down, and your grandfather came back the lane, and of course he seen us, and right away he wanted to ride a horse too. Well, there's only two horses, and there's three kids, so what can you do about it? But he got screaming and yelling, and he was going to the house and tell mother if we didn't let him ride, So, well, we thought, well, we better let him ride, and I guess mother maybe come back and make us put both horses away and nobody rides, which probably would have been the fair thing. I might have done it myself in later years. So anyway, we decided to let him ride. Well, I put him on the horse, and about the first jump, he went off in the sand. Then he yelled harder than ever, so we caught the horse and brought him back. And they were used to us kids playing with him. It was like playing with a pet dog, They knew when to stop and look after us and everything else. And they'd no more step on you than anything, That's funny, a horse, you can be laying on the ground there, and the horse would step right over you and never touch you. So we got him on again, and darned if he didn't fall off again. Well, my brother said, well, that's enough of that. He said, there's that little sling rope there where they'd been hauling in hay. There was a little 1/4-inch sling rope there. Trip rope. Not a sling rope, but a trip rope. He went and got the trip rope, and we put him on the horse's back, and then tied one ankle and put it around the horse's belly and tied the other ankle. And tied him on there. And boy, he went lickety scattered down the field, and that was fine. And when the horse knew when you come to the fence that was it, so he'd come to the fence, he stopped and turned to come back, and Roy slipped over on the side of the horse, and he couldn't get back on. There he's tied, his feet tied on, and he's got a hold of he knew enough to hang on to the mane. He had one hand in the mane, and he come back riding on the side of the horse. Well, as soon as he slipped over like that and come back, the horse practically stopped. He didn't, his run was all over. He still come back. So we took him off of that, no more of that, and boy, my dad heard about that he hit the moon, and we had never thought about that, but that horse would have dragged him to death if he'd have slipped his hand and went under the horse's belly. The horse would have dragged him to death. So we got drowned, and there was no riding. We couldn't take a horse out and ride. We was about a month before we could ride a horse after that, He really laid the law down to us. But we never, that's how you do things, and we were just as innocent about hurting him, about hurting him or anybody else as far as that goes, about anybody getting hurt. But we just thought that was the thing to do. If you can't stay on, why tie you on? That's the only way to keep you on there. I thought about that so many times, so many things that you do. How close do you come to death and you don't realize it? Just how close do you come? How do you?
Any particularly interesting, colorful characters that you remember from?
Oh, there was all kinds of characters. If you can remember them, there was one to remember in particular. Everybody, I guess, knew him was old Skunk John that lived up the road from us there. He used to hunt skunk, and he would skin them. And how that man could ever live at that place, I don't know, because if the wind blew right, you could smell it for a mile down the road.
Well, is the session over?
And
No.
and he would have anywhere from 50 to 60 skunk hides hanging up there all winter long, drying out. He'd even have them tacked in the house if he didn't have any place else, and lay down and go to sleep with them. I never know what his last name was. Everybody knew him Skunk John. All you had to do was Skunk John, and everybody knew him. Now, my granddad, he wasn't beyond killing a skunk and skinning it, but you never got any scent at all. You might, if you went right up close to the hide and smelled it like you would a flower or a rose, sure, you could smell a skunk then. And or if you broke the sack with the first thing he did when he skinned the skunk. Now, a skunk, he can't release his venom or his scent. He can't release that until he cocks his tail. As long as his tail's down, no way can he release his scent. He's got to throw it right up over his back. So all you got to do is keep his tail down, and there is no scent. So even after you kill him, you tie his hind legs and his tail together, because his legs will always go forward, and that keeps his tail down. So in dragging him to the house or carrying him to the house, my granddad always put a slip knot around his tail and dragged him to the house, not to the house, but to the barn, the granary where he skinned him. Well, and the first thing he did when he hung him up was remove the scent gland. And you want a good sharp knife and know where that scent gland is and know what you're taking out. Because if you happen to stick your knife in it or something and it runs down over the skunk, then you really got to dig a hole and drop the whole thing in. And so he was pretty good at that. Of course, that comes from turning the hogs into barrows on the farm and everything. They have to castrate all the male hogs and the calves. They turn the bull calves into steers, and the colts into geldings and the horse family. But anyway, with the knack that he had of doing all these things, well, it was very easy to know the scent gland from some other gland. It's surprising what those old timers did. Now, Granddad Chase, he could set an arm or set a leg or something just as good as any doctor you ever seen. Make his own splints and tie it up there and everything, and do a real neat job out of it. Whether it was your ribs or your arm or your leg or anything, he was good at bones.
You just learned that from working with the animals.
I think so. We had the fattest man around the neighborhood there. I don't know whether your granddad ever told you about him or not. That was Alfred Merritt. And he weighed over 600 pounds. And when he got on a piece of machinery with the horses, to balance it up. They had to put a logging chain around the end of the tongue. Otherwise, when he climbed up on a piece of machinery, put his weight on the seat, the tongue would fly up and hit the horses under the chin with the neck yoke. So they'd have to put this logging chain, wrap it around the end of the tongue to weight that, so that he could ride a piece of machinery. But he didn't do much riding because he drove the machinery down on the ground so far that it was too much effort for the horses to pull it through. I used to think that when I saw him, I just decided that I never wanted to look like that. 600 pounds, that's a lot of man, I'll tell you. He lived about, around 2 miles from us, not too far away. Oh, we kids, when we were kids, 2 miles, that was nothing to walk 2 miles, and like you'd be visiting us, we'd tell you about this big fat guy, you'd want to see him, we'd go for a walk and walk down past his place there, and he'd generally be outside or trying to walk. He couldn't walk, he just kind of shuffled, 1 foot ahead of the other, and these great big overalls that he wore. He had to have a special overall, and he looked short, but he wasn't short when you stand up beside him. He was I'd say about 5'10", 5'9", 5'10", and and I could get back and tell you how we first learned to smoke. I don't know, I suppose lots of kids do that, but the first smoking we ever did was corn silk. Newspaper and corn silk. That was the first cigarette smoking, was newspaper and corn silk, but we used to make our own pipes. We'd take a corn cob and take the center out of a corn cob and then get a branch off a currant bush, shove a piece of wire and push the pith out of the branch in the currant bush, and then dig bore a hole in the side of the corn cob and fit the stem in there and make your own pipe. And we used to smoke our corn silk in that. Well, then later in the winter time, it was hard to get a currant bush, or anything like that, so it was easier to pick up a piece of newspaper and roll up a wad of corn silk into it. And we get over in the cornfield then, and nobody could see us smoking, but the one thing that we didn't realize, that the smoke had to go up, and anybody around there looked like your cornfield was on fire or something. A bunch of us in there coming home from school and smoked corn silk, and they knew what we were doing. And then another time we climbed up in an apple tree. The branches was real heavy on the apple tree, and this was down at West Wells. And he had a smokehouse right near the orchard there, where he smoked hams and bacon and things like that. And he'd taken the fire out from the smokehouse there, and cleaned out the ash pit in the smokehouse there, and the wind had blown it up against the root of an apple tree. It had a lot of leaves onto it, and he'd started the fire in the root of his apple tree there. So he had to go to the pump and pump a pail of water and bring it down and throw it on that. Well, a couple of days after that, John and I climbed up in the apple tree and made our cigarettes up there, and we were puffing away on this corn silk, and there's the smoke coming out of the apple tree, and Wes saw it, and he thought his apple tree was on fire, so he come tearing up there, and with a pail of water, and throw a pail of water on it, and then he seen there was no fire there, no smoke from there. He looked up and seen us up in the tree, so he made us come down. Since he had the pail of water there, he didn't know what else to do with it. He threw the pail of water on us. He made us stand together, and he threw the pail of water on us, put the fire out. Like that. And then in thrashing time, we used to blow the straw. After thrashing, they'd blow the straw into big straw stacks. Well, that was the oat straw was kept separate to itself. There's no beards in oat straw. Wheat and barley, there's beards in it. But the oat straw is a clean straw. So when you got to thrashing the oats, you always blew a pile of that by itself. No beards, and that's what you use to stuff your mattresses with to make your bed. And all the mattresses around the neighborhood. I suppose I was 15, 16 years old before I ever saw a manufactured mattress. They were all feather tick, straw and feather tick. You had your straw tick underneath and then a feather tick on top. So they'd use this oat straw then to stuff your bedding with. That used to be a great thing, to get up to the top of that straw stack and then slide down the straw stack. Now you're talking about being up higher in this house, Oh, sure, they blow that right up in the air, They have to confine it as much as they can because you've got to build a fence all the way around it and let the cattle stomp around there, and that converts that straw all into manure with them using it for bedding and stuff. And then in the spring of the year, you haul that out and put it on the land for fertilizer. That was the only fertilizer you had. You didn't have commercial fertilizers. So if you made your stack too wide, why, you'd have to build a fence all around the farm if you didn't confine that stack as high as you could. So that used to be quite a trick on my granddad's stacking the straw or stacking hay or anything like that. He knew how to lay it together, and they'd come for miles around to get him to come and build a stack for them. A lot of them didn't know how to build a stack. The first windstorm come along, and the stack was on the ground, But he knew how to layer it so that it didn't matter which way the wind come, it would hold it. So we used to have a lot of fun with that, climbing up on this straw stack, get up to the top, and then slide down this straw stack. But be darn sure that you go into the oat straw. Don't slide down a barley, or you'll be picking barleys for the next 2 days. Those barley beards, they really stick. Wheat is bad enough, but barley, it's terrific. And you had your own swings, and you could build a swing whatever height you dared to go. The longer your ropes, and you had all that space to swing in, and nothing in your way or anything like that, And if you took 2 sling ropes and dropped down 2 sling ropes way up in the tree, and then tied the 2 sling ropes together, and then you take a board and cut V's in each end of it and put that across your rope for the board. And I'm telling you, you could swing up in the air there 30 feet in the air with these things, And a lot of them couldn't take it when you'd push them so high, and they'd yell for it to quit. No more, don't push me anymore. And we used to make a hammock. Did I ever love that? I think I enjoyed that hammock more than anything else. We'd take barrel staves, take a 40-gallon barrel, and generally a vinegar barrel or molasses barrel. The staves are just rounded and just shaped right, almost arched like a saucer, And then you take 3 strands of wire, 3 double strands of wire, and you'd take your barrel stave and you'd thread it through this one strand, through the center strand and the outside strand. Now when you come back with your next slat, with your next barrel stave, cross your wire. You see, the one goes through this way. Now when you come back the other way, cross your wire and put it in this way, and it's just like tying a separating knot between the staves. and then you want to crowd them as tight together as you can, so that you're not laying on a crack when they get in there. And we'd make a hammock and stick it up between two trees. And then these barrel staves just hooped the way they were, and then take a horse blanket, just a common horse blanket. And the horse blanket's always clean on the outside. The only place it gets hairs on it or soil is on the inside. So you fold it over, fold it inside, leave the outside out, and then you've got the straps that hold the straps that hold the blanket on the horse are just right to hook them up to hold it on your hammock there, and then fix yourself a cushion. And I used to love to get in that thing and read. I'd read in there. All the old dime dick novels and everything that you could get a hold of. We used to have that strung between the apple tree and the pear tree. They were just the right distance apart to string them up, and you was always in the shade, whether the sun come the east or west or straight down. It was always so nice and cool in there. Oh yeah, Halloween. That was a great stunt, when you'd get behind the outhouse, and then lay down, because sooner or later, somebody's going to come out, and if you keep your eye on the outhouse, and if there isn't anybody going into it, it all depends on how many was in the family on the farm there, So we generally pick out a farm where we knew there was more than one person living there, and like the Coulters right behind us there was Olive and Effie and Malcolm and Amber and Ralph, and then Dad and Mother. There was sure to be somebody, but we had to be careful of Dad and Mother, and they might get a little hostile, or you might hurt them, So you'd wait for one of the kids to get in there, and then have to sneak up and give her a push, and then it would fall on the door, you see, and that locked it so that when you got behind it and pushed it over, it fell on the door. So they'd have to stay there and yell for somebody to come and get them, And then down at George Allison's one night, we took the wheels off his wagon and carried the wagons and put them up on top of the drive shed. And that's a silly thing to do, And but we never, and we'd take a gate off, take somebody's gate off, and put it someplace else, and just anything to, and maybe the rail fences back in the rail fence days. It wasn't unusual for us to take a rail fence down and pull the rails across. Say there was a rail fence on each side of the road. Well, the roads were only about 20 feet wide, and the rail was 12 feet. So you could bring the rails this way and the rails this way, and you not only got his fence tore down, but anybody driving up and down the road can't get past until he gets out and moves the rails. So, that was down to Wells's there. Their house was built up on the hill, and we didn't know that Wes's dad was in there. Bill Wells was in there, and we pushed it, and the doggone thing kept turning. It was he inside of it was what was making it turn, you see. Right. Because every time that it would stop, why, he'd wiggle, and then it'd flip on over, and naturally his weight was on the downside of the hill, and it'd stop and then flip over, and then stop and then flip over. And we got a little bit alarmed because the big creek was down at the bottom of the hill there. And we was just hoping it didn't roll in the creek, because we'd have had to get in there and get him out if it had. So they never did. I guess they never did find out who did it. They might have suspicioned who it was. Another time we went. This is in the coming home from school. And oh, it was hotter than blazes. And we was coming by. That was Elliot's. What was Elliot Hardy's? Past Elliot Hardy's farm. Well, it wasn't his. It was his farm, but it was his pasture where he had pastured his cattle. And he had a big 100-gallon circular tank there that he kept filled for the cattle, and that's where he'd graze his cattle. They'd all come up there, and he must have had 40 or 50 head of cattle there, they'd come up and drink there. And boy, the old windmill was working, and all this fresh water just coming out and pumping in there. That time we stripped our clothes off and all jumped in that tank. And that was the time it turned the tables on us. George Shaw, that was working for him, come back about that time and saw us in there and saw our clothes, and he sneaked up and got our clothes and carried them back and dropped them behind the stump over there and in the bush, and then got back and watched us. Cripes, we all got out of there and no clothes or anything, and we didn't know what the devil to do. And we finally found our clothes, but they was all in a pile, and you had this, whose is this, whose sock is this, and whose pants is this, and one thing and another. So we got a little trouble that way. It wasn't unusual in the spring of the year when the high water come up in the big creek there that we'd either miss 2 or 3 days of school because you couldn't get across the water. And then after it began to recede, the Hardy one to us, and I got to include myself in that gang. We'd coon the fence, what you call cooning the fence. Go down a wire fence, and walk a wire fence. You're walking sideways down the fence. You got a hold of the fence, and you put a foot from here to here. Instead of climbing over the fence, you're walking right down the side of the fence. You not only have to hang on, but you have to hang on to your lunch box and everything like that. They call that cooning the fence to get across the water there. That was quite a regular feat every spring of the year there to do that.
I remember you telling once about the little schoolhouse that everybody went to, and some stories about going to school in that one-room schoolhouse.
Oh yeah, it was just a one-room schoolhouse. That schoolhouse now is converted into a dwelling. The people that bought the schoolhouse converted it into it. It's a real nice home there now. That was SS number 4. Well, and the original school, the one that I went to, and what I started to, and I'm not sure whether your grandpa started to that school or whether we were across the road when he started. But it was built right on a hill, let's say. When that was first built, and that was built back. In fact, my dad went to that same school, and when that school was built at that time, well, they had to build everything up on a hill because there was no drainage. See, there was no drainage, and all down in the flatland, that's where the water run. If it rained with no drainage or anything like that, it could be mud up to your ankles for a couple of weeks after it quit raining. You'd still have the mud because there was no way for the water to run off. And then doggone mosquitoes breed into it and everything, and all kinds of water bugs and things like that. And so they built them on these hills. And then right down at the bottom of the hill, there was a creek that run through there that drained the valley between the two hills. The Merritt Farm was on one hill, and the school was on the other hill, and the creek went in between them there. And Dad had it was like what they called the entrance to the school, and that was just like a vestibule. I got out here, on the one side was the girls, and the other side was the boys. That was where you took your coats off and your wraps off and put your lunch up and stuff like that. And then right inside the door, as you went inside the school, there was an area where there was no seats, and then that's where the stove was, where they piled up the stove wood and stuff like that to keep the school warm. And that was just what they call a sheet iron heater. Oh boy, would that thing turn red hot, but it would actually turn red hot, and throw out heat. I'd throw that heat all the way from the back of that school down to the front. Anybody that sat in the area of that stove back there, you stripped right down to your shirt sleeves, But if you were up at the front, well, you keep your sweater on up at the front, And then no circulating heater to it or anything. That hill was great for tobogganing down in the wintertime. There's always snow or ice down there, In fact, I learned to skate at the bottom of that hill there. Just a kid, 6, 7 years old, and I learned to skate on that strip down at the bottom there. You always had an hour you only had 15 minutes recess, but you always had an hour at noon. And you could eat your lunch in about 15 minutes, them days, and then you had an hour and 45, or I had 45 minutes to horse around before you had to answer the bell again. Well, then they moved that school. They moved that, I think I was in the second or third class when they moved that school. They bought an acre over by that time the tile work was in, and they'd beginning to tile the fields and all that sort of thing. And so they used that flat part. It used to be really mean to try to play ball or football or anything on this hill. Just almost impossible to play any kind of a game on the hill, and then you was always kicking the ball and throwing the barrel over in Merritt's grain there, and they was always knocking down a lot of his grain alongside of the creek there to find your ball after it went over there. Something about that acre on the other side there, real flat, was beautiful. And we had a nice ball field in there then. But we used to have the two outhouses, You've seen them that way where they're not right together. They're together and they're not. They're both in the same corner of the field. But on one side, it's the boys, and on the other side, it's the girls. And then they have a space about this big between the two buildings. You know what a gimlet is? You ever see a gimlet? Yeah. You know what a gimlet is? Well, it's like a drill, like a wood drill, except it's got this big long shank and a handle onto it that's fastened together. One of the Merritt boys brought a gimlet over there one day, and so you had to do that. Like you had to put up your hand and ask to leave the room, and you go down there, and they left the gimlet down there so each one of us could take a turn and boring a hole through there. So we bored the hole through ours, wasn't bad, and then you had to reach on across the space between the two, and then bore the one through the girls. and it didn't work too good, because it wasn't too long till we got caught. The shavings were telltale there, and then to try to find out who did it, who bored the hole through there. Anyway, he had the darndest dog. Graham and I'd go up there, and he's just the nicest, friendliest dog you ever saw. But about the time you went to bed at night, you'd hardly get in bed. And that bugger, he would howl, and he would howl, and he would howl. And Uncle Otto would open the upstairs window and yell at him, and that didn't do any good. And finally, you'd have to go outside and hit him a kick before he'd move, good howling. So Graham and I was there one night, and we'd gone to bed real early. It was only about 11 o'clock, and we'd gone to bed. Boy, that dog started to howl. And we were sleeping downstairs. They'd given us their bed downstairs, and they were upstairs. And Otto yelled down, "Jack, go out there and kick that dog in the ass and make him stop howling." And I said, "Oh, he's just baying at the moon." I said, "No, hell no." He said, "He's not baying at the moon." He said, "The moon can rise and set, and that bugger won't move." He said, I said, "Well, what's he howling at?" And he said, "Well, a damn dog's sitting on his nuts and he's too lazy to get off." Go up there, so I went out and gave him a kick. Sure enough, he got up and stopped. He was right. Old Tom, he made a little money out of that. He started charging him 25 cents or he wouldn't play it for him,
Play the tape he'd made?
Yeah, the tape he made. He wouldn't play it. I think he still got the tape. And that was 10 or 15 years ago. Another time, Odd and I, we won a case of beer. Well, it was too late to see that. It was on a Saturday night. And we didn't get down there, and he had to work in the field. And it was too late to make Chatham, but he thought Wallaceburg stayed open till 7 o'clock. So we hurried up and had our dinner and went over to Wallaceburg to see if we get a case of beer. And we got over there, and the place was closed over there. They'd changed their closing time for the summer and made it closing at 6 instead of at 9 like they had been closing. So anyway, he met somebody on the street there. I don't know who it was. Met somebody on the street and asked him if he knew where we could get a case of beer for the weekend. No, he didn't know, but if we wanted a bottle of beer, if we drove out to the river road there until we come to a big white farmhouse. He said it's about 2 miles out there, a big white farmhouse with a red barn. Why, he said you can get most anything you want in there. And that's the way he said, you get most anything you want in there. So anyway, we drove out, and I was driving an old 1924 Hupmobile at the time, touring car with the top down. We drove into this farmhouse, and we'd no sooner got in there until Otto said, "Jack, turn that damn car around." I said, "Why?" He said, "Turn it around. Head that thing for the road. We don't know what's in there." So I turned it around, and I just nicely got it turned around. And woo, 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 woo. And you never seen so many squaws come out of a place in your life. We'd gone 2 miles from Wallaceburg down. We're right at the foot of the river that goes over to Walpole Island there. And I'd have said, "Jack, get out of here." And I was dumbfounded. I said, "What?" He said, "Get out of here." And so I thought he meant it at that time the way he spoke, so I started out there and had nothing flat. there was at least a half a dozen squaws hanging on that car. Then, had your running board on there. They had on a running board and everything. And old Uncle Otto, he just stood up, and pow, pow, pow. And he said, "Get out of here. They'll tear you to pieces." He says, "They've been drinking. They'll tear you to pieces. They'll tear the damn clothes off you." And so we went back into town then. Oh, he was mad. He didn't know that's what they had. They had a bunch of Indian gals in there, where you could spend a couple of dollars if you wanted to. He didn't know that. And we went back looking for this guy. We figured that he set him up, and set him out there. I was glad we didn't find him, because Otto was just at the point that he had taken him apart, and I didn't want to get mixed up in that. So we left then, and we came back, and we got down to the 16th. He said, "I'm getting drier by the minute." He said, "I got to have a drink before we go home if we go to Detroit." He said, Kent Hyatt's brother, he said, lives down the 16th here in the shack. He said, I think maybe he's got some beer." So we pulled down and parked on the side of the road, and to show you the kind of place it was, you went up steps on one side of the fence, crossed over the steps, and down on the other side. Instead of a gate, they just built the steps over the fence. So we went in, and sure enough, Dick, wasn't that his name? Hyatt's brother? I think it was Dick. Anyway, Dick gave us a beer, and we had a beer, and then Otto wanted to buy a case, or half a case, dozen bottles or what. No, he didn't have any to sell. He just had enough for himself. So we said good night and thanked him for the beer and offered to pay for it. He wouldn't take it. We started out, and we got about halfway from the house out to this fence, And Otto said, "Say, Jack," he said, "that guy's got beer around there." He said, "You stay here." He said, "You stay here, and I'm going back behind that, circle around, go behind the fence." And he said, "If he's got some beer, I'm going to take it. I'll pay him for it when I see him," he said. "I know he's got beer back there." So anyway, he disappeared in the dark. Now he said, if I get the beer and you hear me coming, why, he said, you head for that fence. Or he said, if he happens to hear us and comes out, he said, that old bugger's got a shotgun in there. He might just take a shot at us. He said, so if that door flies open, you hit the ground. Well, I waited there. I must have waited 5 or 10 minutes, I guess, and dark as a stack of black cats. You couldn't see a hand in front of your face. You just had to guess where the fence was, where that gate was. I couldn't even see the car. But a little while I heard pat, 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 pat on the ground there, I'd come, and all at once he said, "Jack," he said, "scatter. You go that way and I go this way." He said, "My God," he heard us, and he said, "I see him reaching for the gun." And just then the door flew open, and boom! Out goes a blaster shotgun, and the shot hit that fence, and zing, zing, zing. Oh, boy, I'm telling you, I was over that fence. I couldn't even see the gate. Couldn't even see the steps, but I got over that fence and down in that ditch before you could stay Jack Robinson. And just about that time, boom, the other blast. Well, I was smart enough to know that there's only 2 shots in the shotgun. You got to load again. So I got up and made it for the car. I switched the lights on, so I could see. I didn't know where he was. I'd gone one way, he'd gone the other. We didn't meet going over the fence. I didn't even wait for the steps. I swung over that fence somewhere. And so I'd have come tearing up by that time and jumped in the car, and away we went. And to this day, to this very day, I didn't think about it at the time, but to this very day, I think I ought to went back and told Dick, now, old Jack's out there. He's going to hit the ground. You be sure and shoot up in the air there. And scare the hell out of him. Well, it worked anyway, because I couldn't have been any more scared if it was done on purpose. But to this very day, I think that I ought to put him up to taking a shot there. But that shot singing down that fence, and when I'd have said, now you be sure and go that way, and then I don't know where he went. It was so dark, he probably just stayed still or dropped on the ground, and the guy shot down that other way and hit the fence. But Robert Shaw was my dad's first cousin. They were both born in '77, and they could have passed for twins. They resembled each other both in physique, and both 6'4" in their stocking feet, and very, very tall and slim, and very sinewy, powerful men they were. And Robert decided to become a sailor and follow the Great Lakes, sail on the Great Lakes rather than the sea. He preferred the Great Lakes, and he was a purser. He got a first-class education on merchandising, and when I say it was now in '97. November the 7th, '97. They were assigned Idaho to make a trip from Buffalo to Chicago. And they all knew that it was a dangerous trip, that the ship really wouldn't stand much of a storm. But the weather was real calm, and they thought they could make it before they ran into an ice jam or a winter storm, and would be able to get up through the Mackinac Straits and back down to Chicago for Christmas. So they left Buffalo on the morning of the 5th of November, and it really clouded up that day and became very overcast, and by nightfall you couldn't see a star or anything. It was pitch dark. Looked like a storm was coming up. And a storm finally did come up, and it wasn't too large. It wasn't considered a hurricane or a tornado or anything, but the ship that they had was so unseaworthy that she broke up just off a long point on Lake Erie, just a day's run out of Buffalo. And she went down. They had 37 aboard. Why there was 37 on that smaller ship those days, everything was done manually. You didn't have all the different equipment that you have today to move boxes and barrels and stuff. It was all done by manpower. So when she broke up and went down, out of the 37, there was only 2 of them that ever reached land or ever saw land again. And there was very few of them that they ever found out who they were or what happened to them. And Bob, being a strong swimmer, he struck out, and he knew the ship was that she was doomed, but he struck out swimming to get away from it from the undertow, and so he just kept swimming. And fortunately, he touched bottom and had no idea where he was or what he was on or anything else until it cleared up in the morning. And he had come in on one side of the point at what they call Long Point on Lake Erie. So the next morning he struck out to see where he was or what he could find to eat or what he could do, and he heard something rustling in the bushes, and one of the other boys come up on the other side of the point, just a few hundred yards from where he was. And those were the only two that ever survived the disaster. And Bob was very good at writing jingles and stuff like that, and he ended up by composing a little poem that he entitled Idaho's Fate. And I'm fortunate enough that my dad gave it to me and passed it on down the line, and it won't take too long to read it. The Idaho's Fate. Come all gallant sailors, I hope you will draw near, and for your dead companions I would you shed a tear. Think of the many fellows that to the bottom did go, off Long Point on Lake Erie, with the steamer Idaho. It was the fall of '97, the date November the 5th. The Idaho left Buffalo to make her final trip. Her crew was all light-hearted. For Chicago they were bound, but off Long Point on Lake Erie, some of their dead bodies were found. There's no blame attached to the captain or the mate, for we all did long expect it would be the old ship's fate. For she was as weak a coffin as any man could sail, and there is only two of her illustrious crew left to tell the mournful tale. God help the wives and mothers that at home do weep and yearn for the loving sons and husbands that never will return. They will think of them in years to come with hearts both sad and sore, for their lifeless bodies now do lie on Lake Erie's cruel shore. God help the manager of Western Line when he receives his doom, when vengeance will arise and cry from Lake Erie's watery tomb, and when before his Maker for mercy he'll implore, it would have been better had he died that night on Lake Erie's cruel shore. Robert Shaw. From experience, you come up with probably different things that you've been taught all your life. Because back in the nasty nice 90s and the very early 1900s, illegitimacy was really frowned on, and morality was one of the things that were preached on every corner, and so we weren't allowed to associate with anyone that was living out of wedlock or had been born out of wedlock or anything like that. Marriage was the only institution that was accepted at that time, and that wasn't just in one area, but that was worldwide. So where I began to think and wonder, the experience I had one Sunday, it was a pretty hot Sunday, and we took the old horse and buggy, and I and my brother went to Sunday school, which we were supposed to attend, Sunday school and then Bible study afterward. But it was so hot, just the thoughts of going inside, because the those days when you went inside, you had to wear a coat. Well, it didn't matter whether it was 90 in the shade or not. You never took your coat off. That was true too of funerals, churches, or anything else. You just didn't go without a coat. So we decided that a bunch of wee boys with a bunch of the other people there, a bunch of the other boys there, that it would be much nicer to go swimming down the river. The river ran right through Kent Bridge. In fact, that's where Kent Bridge got its name, because it was the longest bridge in Kent County. That spanned the Thames River anywhere. So we had about 3 different rigs that we loaded up with the kids, and away we went down to the river to swim. We had to go down to Jack Sherman's, was the nicest beach along the river there, and we went down to Jack. He had a huge gravel pit there. I was about 11 years old, and I could swim across the Thames River and back in the summertime, but it wasn't unusual for us to get in the water like that. And we didn't have such a thing as a water ball, but we tried different tricks, diving and getting somebody by the legs and all this type of thing, like a bunch of kids will do. Well, we swam out about halfway across the river, and then it was too sunny on the other side, and we decided to come back on the shadier side. So we turned and came back, and I was the last one to turn. The other boys got out and was on shore, and as I came in and got where I could touch bottom, when I went to step on the bottom gave way and got me by the feet, and I started to be dragged under. So I yelled for help when I realized I couldn't get out, and I heard one of the boys say, "Oh, that's Kraft. He's trying to let on he's drowning or something." And I guess I went down, I don't know how many times, but I went under and was fighting my way back up. And a little fellow named Cubby Showcraft suddenly decided that I needed help, and he dove in. He only had about 40 feet to come to get me, but he came and got a hold of me, and he couldn't pull me out either. And so then there was one of the bigger, stronger boys there. Fred McKim was his name. And he came out and took the 2 of them to pull me out and get me in the shore. And by that time, I'd passed out. So that somebody did know enough to turn you over on your stomach and press the water out of you. And so I finally came back to consciousness and began to realize what had happened. And this little fellow that came and got me was one of the boys that we'd all shunned and looked down on, because he was an illegitimate son of, well, I don't know whether I should tell her name. I guess it's okay. Her name was Maud Showcraft. So if it hadn't been for out of all the boys that we were with, which numbered over a dozen, Cubby Showcraft was the only one out of the ones that came and rescued me, and if it hadn't been for him, I probably wouldn't be here today. And so that, as years went by, and the present time, at that time, it started me thinking a little bit, and then as you listen to your parents and grandparents and what have you, and your teachings in the church that God was the creator of all things, and that God was love, and love was the great factor in creation. Well, that got me to thinking, well, even Cubby, even if he was born out of wedlock, was born from a love emotion, or he wouldn't have been there. So I have never, to this day, have I never frowned on any living being, no matter how he was created or where he was created. I never frowned on him as a person. I frowned on many of their actions, but as for being, and I think that's what Shakespeare meant when he said to be or not to be. I think he had something like that in mind. So it changed my philosophy about morality from that time on. I feel that if there is such a thing as immorality, that I owe my life and to immorality, if there is such a thing.